Hello, welcome to the season. Now, if you consult your trusty terrace hymn books, you'll find a perennial favourite in there that originated in the 1970s, sung to the melody of the Dam Busters theme. It started, "We all hate Leeds and Leeds and Leeds, Leeds and Leeds and Leeds," and, well, you get the idea. In fact, apart from one obscenity in the final reprise line, those 5 words were actually the sum total of the lyrics. The fact is, everybody hated Leeds in the 70s because they were generally so much better than the team you supported yourself, and they seemed to know it. Well, today on the season, we are looking at perhaps their finest incarnation, the 1973-74 title-winning side, in the company of Gordon McQueen, who anchored their formidable defence when he wasn't up at corners and free kicks, scoring crucial goals with his head. Gordon, I suspect you've been serenaded with that song a few times at various grounds around the country.
Yeah, certainly true. Certainly away from home. Leeds were a terrific side, as you rightly say, but they seemed to be an unpopular one because they were competitive and maybe too competitive for some people's likings, and you always suffered a torrent of abuse when you went away from home.
And you'd arrived the season before, the one we're talking about, from St Mirren. What was it like to walk into that dressing room? Was that an intimidating experience in itself?
It certainly was. As a young lad coming down from Scotland, and you open the dressing room door and there's people like Jack Charlton there, that's won a World Cup winners medal a few years earlier, Norman Hunter, Alan Clark, Paul Madeley, all established England internationals. Some of my heroes as a Scotland supporter, Billy Bremner, captain of Scotland, you've got Peter Lorimer, Eddie Gray, so it was certainly exciting times for a young boy coming down from Scotland.
Yeah, phenomenal number of Scots in that side, which we'll get to later. First though, let's have a look at a little sampler buffet of Leeds in action.
And it's there by Jordan.
Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry about a thing.
Jones. And another.
'Cause I'll be standing on the side when you check it. Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry
Clark going it alone.
Now, Gordon, some great stuff in there, and Leeds were so dominant at their best. It's actually a surprise to look back in the records and see how often they'd actually finished runners-up in the league or got to cup finals but hadn't won them. Is it fair to look at them as slightly as underachievers coming into that season?
No, I think it's not surprising when people say that because they were runners-up on so many occasions, but you've got to remember in those days that you never had the size of squads that clubs have got nowadays. You'd only 15 players in your squad, and you know, there was no rotation or resting players, and if you were fit in those days, you played, and that was that. And they get involved in so many tournaments, you know, the League, the FA Cup, the League Cup, and in Europe, and always made advances in those tournaments. So you ended up, the players in those days, playing an astonishing amount of games, and it did catch up with them in a lot of seasons.
Certainly the season before, you were perhaps victims of your own success, competing on several fronts. Let's take a look now at Leeds reaching, but failing to win, sadly for them, the European Cup Winners' Cup and the FA Cup.
But if you try sometimes, you might find you get what you You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. Try sometimes, you can just walk down. You get what you need.
Bremner smiling in defeat, and his side today, for once, well, they've looked human.
So Gordon, disappointment at the end of the previous season. What was the mood like coming into 73-74? I suppose you'd only be human if that were on your minds.
I think at the end of that season, which was a miserable finish to the season, losing to Sunderland and obviously losing to Milan in the final in Salonika, I think everybody thought that was going to be the breakup of that Leeds side. There was talk of Don Revie going to Everton at the time, that was making all the headlines, and this big player going here and another player leaving. In fact, we started the next season with Don Revie still in charge, and in actual fact the only person that had left was Jack Charlton to go and manage Middlesbrough.
And you were heir to his black book?
I don't know about heir to his black book, but I was heir to his position. But it was all made pretty easy for me with the players that I had round about, and there were some fantastic players.
All right, here we go. Let's get into the 73-74 season with the opening game of the season, Leeds at home against Everton.
Johnny Giles with the ball for Leeds in the first half, and from this move, built up now first by Madeley, then Giles again, and now Clark, comes the Leeds' first goal. It's scored by Bremner, who loses the ball at first, wins it back, gets up, takes it from Clark, ploughs forward and shoots past Lawson, although Kendall seems to think he might have fouled that Everton player before he regained possession. Anyway, that was 1-0 to Leeds. And now in the second half, from this free kick on the left, comes the second goal. The scorer, Johnny Giles, with this right foot shot. Straight through a crowd of players from well outside the area. Giles and Bremner were now well in control in the middle of the field, and Bremner turns the ball across. It's flicked on here by Clark, then a nice touch from Mick Jones, deceives the centre half, and that's 3-0 for Leeds. But Everton weren't quite finished, at least Kendall wasn't. Getting the ball across the penalty area here under pressure, headed out by McQueen, and a fine shot from Joe Harper, the sort of goal that Everton fans hope he'll score a lot of this season, to make the final score Leeds 3, Everton 1.
John Motson in reporting rather than commentating mode there, and what sounded suspiciously like applause from the BBC sound effects library. There'll be an internal investigation about that these days. Either way, a great start to the 73-74 season for Leeds, and it gets better after the break.
Proudly sponsored by C&A Building Plastics.
Great footballers are not like ordinary people. They are heroes.
Tomorrow at 6:40 on ESPN Classic.
With poker, like a lot of things, not everything can be taught. You read the books, you study the players, but sometimes it's just about instinct. So you play and you practice, and one day you don't think it, you feel it. Practice for free at the world's largest poker site, PokerStars.com, and find the PokerStar in you.
New Citroën C5. Unmistakably German. Made in France.
The diamond standard of dishwashing won't come from a dirty dishwasher. Finish dishwasher cleaner is far better at removing hidden grease and limescale. And a cleaner dishwasher means cleaner dishes. Finish, the diamond standard. Flawless dishes must be free from water and spots. Finish Turbo Dry removes the water, leaving dishes up to 100% drier. It's only dishwashing, but it should be perfect. Finish, the diamond standard.
So, she's got the house, the car, the lot.
You're gonna get yourself online, mate. Find someone else. Listen, Tiscali are doing their best ever broadband deal at the moment. Up to 8 meg superfast broadband, a free wireless router, and weekend calls to UK and top international destinations. All for just $6.49 a month.
My friend really fancies you.
Unbelievable.
I know. Broadband for $6.49.
For superfast broadband from just $6.49, call Tiscali now on 0800 107 9000.
Proudly sponsored by C&A Building Plastics.
Welcome back to the season. Our guest is Gordon McQueen of Leeds' great title-winning side of 1973-74. Now, Gordon, you opened the season with 7 wins, but Don Revie had already gone public in saying that he wanted you to go throughout the season without losing a game, which seems an incredible pronouncement to make, really. Did you feel the pressure of it?
It was, but there was a tremendous determination to do well that season after the disappointment of the previous season, when everybody was beginning to write Leeds off. This was the end of this Leeds United side, and Revie was determined. But when he said that, I mean, a lot of us thought, well, we looked round and we know there's a lot of good players in that dressing room, but we're just wondering, that was a bit of a tall order to go right through the league without getting beat.
Let's talk about Don Revie then. A lot's been said and written about him over the years. How would you sum him up as a manager?
His man management was fantastic. You hear the saying about players that would run through a brick wall for their manager. Now, that was most definitely the case with Don Revie. He was fantastic with his players, and he was really concerned about the welfare of his players, how your wife were, how your family were, little things like you're making sure your mum and dad were looked after when they were coming down for games, and he always made a fuss of them. So his man management and his attention to detail was fantastic.
Well, you talk about attention to detail. He was one of the first, perhaps, to prepare extensive dossiers on your opponents. I mean, did he almost overwhelm you with that kind of stuff?
Well, he never imposed any great tactics on his own side. I mean, you know, when you get players like Billy Bremner and Johnny Giles in the middle of the park, you don't tell them how to go about their business. But yes, it was a great one for Leeds United, our side, and our players knowing absolutely every single detail about the opponent you were playing against, whether he was good in the air, whether he was quick, the type of positions he took up, was he left-footed, did he favour his right, all this type of thing. So his attention to detail in that respect was unbelievable.
And a very driven man, is that fair to say?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. You don't get as far as managers like Don Revie, managers like Arsene Wenger or Sir Alex Ferguson if you're not driven, and he certainly was.
And superstitious?
Yeah, he was very superstitious. He went for a particular walk every time we played a home game at Ellen Road to a certain lamp post and back, and he'd this kind of nervous twitch about combing his hair, and he'd wear the same suit. There's a previous week, if he thought, if we'd won that previous week, in actual fact, he'd burst the trousers off it at 1 week, but wouldn't put another pair of trousers on, insisted that the trousers get sewed up so they'd have the same suit on.
And how did he prepare you? I mean, there's talk, everybody has this idea in their minds of Leeds, the intimidating side, and there are stories of you playing bingo and bowls to bond together.
I don't think there's any doubt they were a touch and intimidating side, because these were great players, and a lot of these great players are fierce competitors, people like Billy Bremner and Johnny Giles and Norman Hunter and Alan Clark. But the preparation was very relaxed. We always played carpet bowls the night before games and the morning of games, and you'd meet for your pre-match and then play a bit of bingo, things like that. So he tried to get you relaxed before the actual big kick-off.
All right, well, let's start to focus on some specific players now. Difficult in a side as great as Leeds to pick out individuals. On the other hand, pretty easy when the side includes Billy Bremner.
It's strange that when you think of Billy Bremner, many other football fans would say they despised Billy Bremner. But you've got to realise this man was a genius. If you watch how he played, and the modern football, you know, he had all the skills that the modern footballers have, and he had vision, and to top it all, he was hard as nails. I think an image of him, not from the 73-74 season, but from my memory, is him apologising to Dave Mackay because he'd obviously niggled a bit, and Dave Mackay had him by the throat virtually, and his feet were off the floor, but he still managed to look innocent, which was beautiful. And I'm sure I remember from that time that shortly after that he gave him another little niggle as well. But he was sublime the way he had the vision, and he linked with Peter Lorimer. My view that Peter Lorimer wasn't really a winger, he was a modern midfielder, and the way he linked with Billy, and they used to play 1-2s, and they were, for me, the core of the team, because Billy, being a little Scotsman, you know, he had the little man's temperament where, you know, he wanted to fight everybody, and I think I certainly liked that, but so did the fans. They loved the fact that he would always put his foot in, and he'd always look innocent when he came out.
Gordon, not many players get statues erected in their memory outside the grounds in which they played, do they?
I'm delighted he has as well. I mean, Billy Bremner's got legendary status at Ellen Road, and quite rightly so. I mean, he was a huge hero of mine, and he was an absolutely fantastic player, and there's absolutely no doubt he was an inspirational captain. He led by example, he was a great leader on the field, and just an absolutely fantastic footballer.
And just never stopped.
No, and he wasn't a great one for training either, you know. He wasn't a terrific trainer, you know. He preferred that. He used to be in the treatment room quite a lot and wasn't a great one. He just wanted to play football, Billy. Give him a ball and Billy was happy. Anything like sprints and half laps and things like that wasn't Billy's cup of tea. He just wanted to play football, and he did it brilliantly.
And he had his disciplinary problems. Was that something that Don Revie tried to rein in, to say, you know, you're the captain?
He had a bit of a job with Billy, because you're right, he did have disciplinary problems. I touched on earlier about these lads that reach the top, and players like Billy Bremner are fiercely competitive, and certainly Billy was. He had a fantastic will to win, and that's what got him into so much trouble.
All right, well, here he is, not getting into trouble, but getting into the box a couple of times. Another game from that early season run of 7 wins, Spurs against Leeds.
Free kick to Leeds. Madeley up at the back of the box. It's Bremner! What terrible marking by Tottenham! Billy Bremner, who scored Leeds' first goal of the season last Saturday, opens the scoring here from the free kick. Really, nobody picked him up, and Evans allowed the ball to go over his head, and it was simply a question of the pace of the header beating the keeper. Madeley, Neighbour, Peters. Come down eventually. It's a good ball, Giles to Lorimer. Here's Bremner! No wonder Pat Jennings looks a bit disconsolate. Giles changing the angle of attack very well, finding Lorimer moving into opposition territory, and the nicely slid ball straight into the path of Bremner in the inside right position. Good return ball. Jones, Clark.
Funny God, I've forgotten Billy Bremner's knack for contributing goals from midfield, but he was keen, wasn't he, Don Revie, on Scottish players? 9 in the squad that season, 5 of you in the first team, which even given Scotland's great football export industry in those days was a pretty high quota.
Yeah, it's changed days. Unfortunately, there's not enough Scots playing in the top flight in English football at this moment in time, but certainly Don Revie liked him. His wife was Scottish for a start, and at one stage there was actually 17 Scots at Ellen Road, and you know, the English players used to run around with Scottish accents at Ellen Road. And
you were divided up in 5-a-side, Scots versus English?
Well, I think you get that at a lot of clubs when they did that, but they did it at Ellen Road, and I'll tell you what, they weren't half competitive, because, you know, people like Norman Hunter and Alan Clark don't lie down, and maybe a bit too competitive at times.
But I mean, team spirit presumably was strong enough as a unit. You didn't divide, there weren't cliques?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we mentioned earlier about Don Revie's man management, and he made sure the team spirit was fantastic, and there was no side had a stronger team spirit than Leeds United.
And we're harping on, obviously, in the highlights, we showed the goals, but 3-0 against Spurs, you weren't letting in goals, which is just as important in that unbeaten run.
Well, in those days it was 42 league games, so you're playing 21 away from home, and in actual fact we only conceded 13 goals away from home that season. We actually won 12 games in the road, which is a fantastic amount of points, because Liverpool, for example, won more home games than Leeds United did than we did at Ellen Road, but we drew a lot. But our away form was absolutely fabulous.
All right, well, you let 1 goal in the game we're about to show now, but you knock in 6. It's Leeds versus Strømsgodset in the UEFA Cup.
The 18,000 crowd at Ellen Road was modest by Leeds standards, but still more than 3 times what the Norwegians in the dark strip are used to. Their number 5 is under pressure here, he makes a mistake, and Alan Clark scores a simple first goal for Leeds. Strømsgodset had done well to hold Leeds in the first leg, and they came back into this match as well. Number 10 there is Patterson. He works a nice 1-2 here, gets away from the defender who was covering him, and equalises, still in the first half. Leeds found that quite an affront, and just afterwards Bremner knocked the ball through for Mick Jones, who looked offside but was allowed to play on to put Leeds back in front at 2-1. Lorimer now with a corner for Leeds on the right. This is not properly cleared, it's knocked back by Bremner, on by Jones. Clark is lurking as usual and scores off the post. At half-time, Leeds led by 3-1. Lorimer really enjoying himself on the right. His cross comes to Frankie Gray, Eddie's brother, little chip, and that's the 4th goal for Leeds. By now, the Norwegians were really demoralised, and it wasn't very long after that Mick Bates scored a 5th goal for Leeds. The crowd were certainly enjoying themselves, and so too was Peter Lorimer. Here he goes again, and from this cross, Mick Jones scores the 6th and last goal, and his 2nd of the match. So in the end, it was a good night's target practice for the Leeds attackers.
So 6 goals at home there, nice cue to talk about the strike force. Alan Clark and Mick Jones were the established pairing, but Joe Jordan playing his way more and more into the team.
Well, Mick Jones started getting a few injuries, and Joe forced his way into the side, you know, and central defenders used to have a rough ride playing against Mick Jones, but they never got it any easier when Joe came into the side and started battering centre-halves all around the place. I mean, he was a young, enthusiastic, swashbuckling centre-forward with stacks of pace and really good in the air. And, of course, you had Alan Clark, who was just an absolutely wonderful finisher, great close control, and, you know, he really was an absolute top drawer, and he proved that with, you know, playing with England at the highest level. So it was a terrific partnership. Either Joe and Clarkey or Mick Jones and Clarkey, and whatever partnership you put out, it was pretty potent.
Clark coming in.
inside. Clark going in alone.
I think if you're looking at a strike force which complemented each other, who necessarily on their own, their skills would not necessarily be considered the top, although certainly Alan Clark was an England player and played at the highest level. But with Mick Jones, those two complemented each other. And the thing about Mick Jones, he was an international in his own right, and the way he made a lot of Clark's goals, including, of course, in the cup final against Arsenal, where a lot of people forget that the diving header from Alan Clark was actually from a cross from Mick Jones. And not only was it from a cross, it was a cross where Mick Jones injured his shoulder, which did affect his following season, which meant that another nationality, a Scotsman, Joe Jordan, played the following season quite a few games alongside Alan Clark. The thing about Clark is he wasn't called Sniffer for nothing, because he really did seem to appear from nowhere and sniff out the goals. He's still seen, in my mind, one of the best strikers I've ever seen, and to see any striker live, you have to appreciate their movement, and Clark and Jones together made the top strike force.
Mick Jones got a crucial goal for you. Liverpool, you mentioned before, your big rivals, the defending league champions, and probably expected to repeat. You beat them 1-0 at Ellen Road, which must have given you a huge boost.
Well, I think we knew at the start of that season that if we were going to win the league, we're going to have to finish above Liverpool. And if we did that, we more than likely would win the league. So therefore, the games with Liverpool were hugely important. And of course, that was the first time we'd met them that season and met them at Ellen Road. And once we'd seen them off, you know, we really started believing that we could go on and win the Premier, well, not the Premier League, the league at the time.
Now, just to go back to the UEFA Cup for a second, you were knocked out of that and the FA Cup at a fairly early stage, and there was talk that it was almost a tactic of Don Revie's because he was so haunted by competing on too many fronts before, he wanted to concentrate on the league.
Well, that's certainly true. They weren't a priority at all, the FA Cup or the UEFA Cup. He'd learned from experience that in previous years, when we touched on why they were second in a lot of these competitions, because they get heavily involved in these cup runs and European runs, and he was totally focused on winning the league that year, and he didn't want any distractions whatsoever. So they put out most definitely weakened sides. A lot of the younger boys, good players, good young players, but certainly nothing like a full-strength Leeds side.
Now, no one would raise an eyebrow about that now with the amount of rotation that goes on in the Premier League, but how big a deal was it then?
Leeds used to play at one stage their full-strength side every single week. And you didn't need a rotation policy at Leeds because you had Paul Madeley, who could play at international class and right across the midfield, right side, left side, centre, or anywhere across the back. So we didn't need to rotate. You just put Paul Madeley in one of those positions. But you'd only smaller squads then. You know, you'd Terry Orith and Mick Bates that figured in plenty of games that season. But you never had big squads, that's for sure. Not like the squads that they have nowadays.
All right, we'll pause for breath and adverts there. When we come back, Leeds play their way into the record books.
Proudly sponsored by CNA Building Plastics.
Some things just can't be undone. Others can't be avoided. You can't darn stop what's coming when the big gun's right into town. Man United v Arsenal. Exclusively not live.
This weekend at 11 on ESPN Classic.
They say you make your own chances in life. Take Eddie here. He didn't go out for his lotto ticket on the day his numbers came up. Fortunately, he played online instead. nationallottery.co.uk.
Peugeot 308, winner of Germany's prestigious Golden Lenkrad Award 2007. For a 24-hour test drive, text nature to 60222. Peugeot, the drive of your life.
From Academy Award-winning director Martin McDonagh comes a deliciously wicked comedy.
She ain't my girlfriend. She's a prostitute.
I'm not aware of any prostitutes in Bruges.
Just have to look in the right places. Brothels are good.
Back off, short.
You don't know karate. Ah!
In Bruges.
On Disney DVD and Blu-ray, imagine 75 years of Disney magic coming to life.
Watch it, will you?
Grumpy. Walt Disney Pictures presents
Dreams do come true.
the family film of the year.
You made a dress out of my curtains.
Do you like it?
Enchanted on Disney DVD and Blu-ray High Def now.
Psst, what? I'm going to be a McVitie's chocolate digestive. Chucky chocolate.
McVitie's Chocolate Digestives, wholemeal at their heart.
New KFC Flavour Station. Boneless bites dipped in smoky barbecue, fiery pepper or sweet chilli sauce. Whatever your mood, we've got the flavour. 5 bites, only $2.69.
Russian Standard.
Russian Standard Vodka. Russia's #1 premium vodka.
Playing poker, playing hockey, it's the same deal. It's about challenging your opponents, learning to make the right move at the right time. With over 10 million players, more tables and more tournaments at every level than anyone else, learn for free at the world's largest poker site, PokerStars.com, and find the poker star in you.
Instead of dealing with lots of different borrowings, you could move to one low-rate homeowner loan and escape your financial confusion. And with a straightforward arrangement fee, there are no hidden costs. So everything's fair and square.
Of those of you who won't be able to see the clay lifted fight, don't you worry, as ESPN Classic has all the boxing you need. And for those of you who don't tune in, you'll end up in the ringside seats.
Boxing in April, weeknights at 8:30 on ESPN Classic. Proudly sponsored by C&A Building Plastics.
Welcome back to the season. It's coming up to Christmas 1973 and Leeds are still unbeaten in the league. Now, Gordon, you've been at the top since pretty much the first week of the season. I suppose one of two things can happen. Either confidence feeds on itself or you start to think, my God, when's this going to end?
We never thought when it was going to end because we were so full of confidence at the time. We thought Don Revin might just be right. We might just get through the season undefeated, particularly after the first week or so, in particular when you've got Everton at home, Tottenham away, Arsenal away, and you won all those games. I mean, that was a really tough start in the league in those days, and then it just goes on and on and on. And you're sitting in the dressing room and you're looking round and you're sitting next to Norman Hunter and you're looking further round the dressing room. There's Billy Bremner and Johnny Giles and there's Alan Clark and Joe Jordan and Peter Lorimer, and you think, take some side to beat us.
All right, well, let's take a look at two sides having a go. Here are Leeds trying to extend their unbeaten run through December and into the new year, up against Ipswich and Birmingham.
Beatty underneath, not a good header, straight to Yorath. And he scored, Terry Yorath. What a disaster for Ipswich. It was a bad header by Beatty, and Yorath's shot deceiving David Best. David Best looking very dejected, Yorath absolutely delighted. His only previous goal in league football was against Newcastle in September 1971. Good use of 2 feet. Madeley. Norman Hunter. Yorath. Jones. And another. Jones the scorer. The move built from midfield, finding Yorath out on the left, who came back onto his right foot to find Jones and Hunter going in together. Jones makes it 2-0 and scores his 10th goal of the season. Clark. Greeny just inside. Yorath on the far post. Clark going it alone. Goal number 99 that he scored for Leeds United. 3-0 to Leeds in the 88th minute. Total solo effort. And equals the 3 that Leeds United scored at Tottenham.
Good piece of play by Big John Roberts. And a good ball to Latchford. Here's Campbell. Hatton's calling for it on the far post. Still Campbell. There's Latchford! That's the early goal that Birmingham wanted, and Bob Latchford has scored it. The move so simple, but Leeds United are a goal behind. Alan Campbell, who really set it up, held onto the ball when Hatton was calling for a cross, found Latchford, and the shot looked so easy. Oh, good interception by Burns. Now Campbell. Hunter didn't really make sure of that, but Madeley helped him out. And that's meant for Latchford. Well played, McQueen. But again, the pass out of defence is not good. Wasn't touched, surely. Throw in. Oh, that's for Lorimer, and he was onside. It's a good cross, and it's there by Jordan. Leeds have saved themselves at the death. Almost the first time the Birmingham defence has been anything other than secure, and Leeds United are level. Lorimer was onside when that ball was played. He got ahead of Gallagher to put in the cross, and Jordan coming in was not marked and made it 1-1. Leeds haul themselves back from the brink.
Terry Yorath in that first game from the days when he was the most famous member of his own family. But Gordon, amazing how often great teams score late goals.
Yeah, and certainly in that Birmingham game, it was a game that we never played at all well, and Big Joe popped up with an equaliser late on. But when you've got great players and you're on the type of run that we were on, there's such a belief that you'll get that goal. You just keep driving and driving and driving right to the very end. So self-confidence, but maybe a bit of arrogance too. I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, the famous ball keeping at the end of the games with the home crowd shouting "Olé," and the other side getting more and more worked up. Yeah, well, it did. When you look back in games like that, it must have been a bit frustrating for the opponents, you know, when you get little Billy doing little reverse passes, which he was brilliant at, and Johnny Giles pinging balls 35 yards out to Peter Lorimer, getting the ball back and pinging it 35 yards out to the left-hand side of the pitch and keeping possession. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what all good teams do. But there was an end product with Leeds. But I mean, keeping possession is one thing, but there seemed to be almost, you know, an edge of humiliation in it. Well, I'm sure quite a few of the opponents, but there was only a couple of occasions that happened that year because they were great pros and they knew as great pros they didn't want to be humiliating opponents. I think there was only a couple of games that season things like that happened. Now, there's also the dirty reputation. Great side, but a side that also put the boot in. Is that a fair reputation? I think they began to lose it that year, and I think people sat up and took notice of the terrific football that was getting played that year. For the first ever time at Leeds United, the side were getting a lot of praise for all quarters. The media were bang on our side because some of the stuff we were playing was terrific. Yes, there was competitive players. I say to get to the top, you need to be competitive. Some of them were fiercely competitive, like Little Billy, Big Joe up front, and the fella I played alongside, Norman Hunter.
Now, Norman, we'll get on to Norman in a second, but I mean, was that part of a club ethos? You know, to win, but, you know, to make sure that you had a physical edge too?
Yeah,
was it something Don Revie preached?
Oh, yeah, there was always a physical edge. I mean, Ellen Road was an intimidating place, full stop, to come with the fans who really got behind their side. And, of course, people didn't like coming and playing. It used to be the Southern Softies at the time, and you always felt that when West Ham or Tottenham or Chelsea ever came to Ellen Road, you really fancied their chances, because they didn't fancy coming to Ellen Road because they knew it was in store. But that particular season, that changed for Leeds United. Everybody started saying, look, what a good footballing side this is.
And you mentioned Norman Hunter. I mean, he was the poster boy for that for that reputation. He might not have been so much if there hadn't been the banner, you know, saying Norman bites your legs. But I mean, you know, how much was his reputation justified?
Well, first and foremost, you've got to remember what a terrific player he was. The amount of caps he got when Bobby Moore was about at the same time. He had a huge amount of caps, and it was great for me as a young lad coming in, a raw, inexperienced young centre-half, playing alongside somebody like Norman that push you here and tell you to do this and go here and jump here and stand this, and he was absolutely terrific. And of course he was a fantastic defender. You know, he used to tackle forwards, and if anybody got past him, I tackled what was left.
And interestingly, the PFA Player of the Year award was inaugurated that year, and he got it, voted for by his fellow professionals.
Well, I'm telling you, he's a terrific player. Now that just tells you what everybody else thought about him, his fellow professionals, which is the highest accolade you could get. A hugely consistent performer, high-level performance, week in, week out, never miss games. I've seen him play with some injuries that you thought he'll be out for a month, playing a couple of days later.
All right, back to the league then, and the unbeaten run. It eventually stretched to 29 games, which was a new record.
Yeah, and you think, well, there's not long to go. It's 42 games in the season, and I'll never forget the 30th game at Stoke City. I was actually suspended. It was the first game I'd missed that season, and I went to watch Celtic v Motherwell at Parkhead, and I went into the TV room at half-time, and everybody was saying, great stuff, Gordon. The runs continue, and even without you, they don't need you, and they're 2-0 up at half-time at Stoke City, and I thought, oh, that's terrific. So I'm back for game number 31, but it didn't work out that way.
It didn't work out. I mean, to lose a 2-goal lead and lose 3-2 in the end seemed to dent your confidence because you had a bad run after that.
Didn't half. I mean, that was a... You think Leeds 2-0 up, they're just not getting it. Hadn't conceded goals, I told you. We'd only conceded 13 away from home all season as it happens. But then we had a little run. It was Burnley, who I think were like one of the bottom teams in the league, beat us 4-1 at Ellen Road. Then we went back to Liverpool and get beat at Anfield. And all of a sudden, a real cosy lead got whittled right down because Liverpool were consistent that season as well.
Yeah, 3 defeats in a row, including that Liverpool game. Did the old fears start to come back and haunt the team about perhaps, you know, finishing runners-up again?
Well, we're lucky in that dressing room. There was an awful lot of experience that knew how to handle situations like that, and there was a manager that was absolutely determined, that ran right throughout the management, the coaching staff and the players to make sure nothing untoward did happen, and we did get back in the rails again.
Yeah, they got back on the rails against Derby. The beaten run ended at 3. This is how Leeds did it.
Jordan to Bremner. That's a good ball for Lorimer. 1-0. And just the goal that Peter Lorimer wanted. Because that ends one of the most disappointing sequences that Leeds have had. It's Peter Lorimer's first goal in the league, apart from penalties, since the 8th of September. No wonder he looks so pleased. The breakthrough that Don Revie was after, beautifully played through by Bremner, and Lorimer doing what he so nearly did at Liverpool the other week, only this time there was nobody to get it off the line. Bremner in the centre, on the right of the picture now. Cherry with the free kick. It's Bremner! That's it! And Leeds have done exactly what they did in the first half. They've come out of an uncertain period, out of defence, and they've snatched a goal. Don Revie having some words now with Terry Yorath, surely about tightening it all up. But little Billy Bremner, has done it again for Leeds. Feeding on that sort of ball, the free kick came over, it came conveniently for Bremner, and his finish was perfect.
So, Gordon, that win presumably steadied whatever nerves had crept in, and with 5 games left in the season, it was your title to lose. Yeah, and I don't think there was ever any doubt in anybody's mind in that dressing room that we were going to go in and we certainly weren't going to lose it. We're all pretty confident we were going to go in and win it. Strange way to win it, though, because you actually won it in the clubhouse, as it were. April the 24th, you weren't playing, but Liverpool were at home to Arsenal. Yeah. And no Sky Sports in those days, no ex-pros with suits and headphones on talking you through the action. Obviously telephone calls between one another, some players listening to it on the radio, others that didn't like it, they were too nervous. And I suppose you could say it's maybe a bit of an anticlimax, but I'll take that any time, because the way it was heading, we might have had to go into QPR on the last day of the season and pick up a point to win the Premier League. But as it happens, Liverpool lost their last 2. We won our last game at QPR, and the gap was bigger than what we anticipated a few games to go. And what was that like to be able to run out for the last game of the season against QPR, knowing you already were champion and you could relax and enjoy the day? It's a nice feeling. I'm glad we weren't going to QPR looking for a point, because they were a good side at the time, a lot of good players. But it was just lovely that everything we'd set out to achieve that season we'd achieved. And you know, it's great when you're a huge Leeds fan. We carried a big travelling support at the time, Leeds United, and it was just fantastic for Don Revie and a lot of the great players to finish that season in such a high, and a side that Billy Bremner said was the best Leeds side he'd ever played in. And do you think that's right? Will that go down as Leeds' best ever season? Well, I certainly wouldn't argue with Billy Bremner, that's for sure. There's been some great sides, great Leeds sides in the history of the club. Certainly before that there was some fantastic sides, but I'll go along with that. And what would be the highlight of it? The 29-game unbeaten run? Because I mean, a run like that was much harder to put together in those days when there were so many strong sides. It's not like the top 4 now. You expect them to win every week. There wasn't the gap between the top clubs and the bottom club in those days. They were all pretty difficult games, but I think it was just the feeling in general that certainly as a young, naive Scottish lad thinking it's like this all the time. You know, the previous season I'd went and sat on the bench at Wembley as a part of a 16-man squad that lost to Sunderland. I played in the Cup Winners' Cup final against Milan. You're winning the league, you're going to White Hart Lane early on in the season and winning, going to Highbury and winning, you think, this is what it's like all the time, this is absolutely wonderful. And then you realise it's not like that all the time, because this side was going to break up and the manager was going to be leaving before long. Yeah, Don Revie left before the next season. That must have been an incredible shock. Or did you have some intimation in advance? A lot of people have said, and I think there might be a bit of truth in it, that he just couldn't bear breaking that side up, selling some of the players that had been with him since, well, you remember Billy Bremner and Peter Lorimer and Eddie Gray, all these boys had been with him from school at 15 and 16 years of age. I'm not so sure whether he could have handled saying to them, look lads, I'm sorry, you're no longer part of my plans at Leeds United, and he went off to manage England and leave that problem for somebody else. If he had stayed, though, could that team have achieved more, do you think, or was the core getting too old? If he hadn't stayed, no, because he was the driving force. There's absolutely no doubt about that. He was the one that got Johnny Giles and Billy Bremner and Alan Clark to go that extra yard for him. A lot of the senior players at the time, like some of the ones I've mentioned, felt that, well, the side got broke up too quickly. There might be a bit of truth in that. I'm not so sure, but you certainly, I know that when these players left, that, well, I felt they were irreplaceable, because there was so many. You can maybe replace 1 or 2 great players on your side, but when there's half a dozen leaving in the space of 18 months, it's very, very difficult to compete with that. All right, well, the speculation about what that great Leeds side might have achieved if Don Revie had stayed could go on forever. What did happen next, of course, was Brian Clough, which would be a show on its own. We'll invite you back for that, Gordon, the off-season perhaps. In the meantime, my thanks to Gordon McQueen for his insights into Leeds' great 73-74 title-winning season. Still the best in club history, more than 30 years on.